newspapers do a pretty good job of letting their own critics come in and speak their piece in the letters column. I was the editor of Letters to the Editor at one point when I worked on a daily newspaper in New Orleans, and I remember one case when I got a letter about racial discrimination from a black man that the publisher would not allow to be printed, and it was one of the most painful moments I've ever had in the media, and there was not much I could do about it. He was not a racist publisher. This was a relatively liberal paper for the Deep South. The competitive paper had been attacking this paper as overly friendly toward blacks, and there was a terrible advertising problem going on, and the paper on which I worked was the paper least likely to go down the drain, which it did. And so the publisher had a concern about this racism that was being used against him, and he felt publishing this kind of letter would give the newspaper opposite to us ammunition to use against us with advertisers. I didn't think it was a good enough excuse. I don't think a good newspaper can turn down this kind of letter. But television doesn't even have letters to the editor columns, and I have said in speeches previously, and this is what I would say if we were here debating 2 nights from now and Barron is here. Television has got to do better in the areas Barron will criticize television on. We have got to do something about access. We have got to let our own viewers have more of a chance to answer us back and criticize us, and preferably in good time. But my concern about government domination is such that I would go in the direction of criticizing television when it was not responsive, when it did not provide a voice for those who needed a voice, and try to exercise political and, well, not political, but citizen control, viewer control in terms of pressure from viewers, to which television is remarkably responsive, and stay away from government control, even if I felt the situation was pretty bad. Now, I think we might find, if we examined what you're talking about, that if we went into specific groups, that there's hardly a group in the country that hasn't had remarkable access to television news programs and documentary programs and special programs on informational subjects. And almost any minority of any kind you can think of, racial, political, religious, has had a chance to have a say. I don't know of any groups that are shut out. We have, what kind of elitists are running television when we get a lot of complaints that there are too many rebels of different kind shown on television newscasts? It's obvious that television has not shut its eyes to people who are trying to improve the system. A lot of people who are establishment types feel that television has been too open to angry people of one kind or another. So I don't think television's record is such as to make you completely distrustful of its openness to all sorts of people who have all sorts of ideas. But it's a good question.
Sir, we've talked much about the problem of government getting too much control. What about the problem of 1 or 2 interests in a community, and perhaps in the largest community we know, the nation, of getting a control over which nobody, even government, then has a say? For instance, if I lived in a community where this particular person wished to warp the public opinion by preventing me from seeing Sticks and Bones, for instance, which was controversial, or a couple of episodes of Maude, which were controversial, what is my recourse in a situation where there is no competition and no possibility for competition?
That is also a first-class question, and my anguish and dismay and indignation at being a member of an audience deprived of something because my station or my newspaper doesn't want to print it or carry it on the air in my community is probably equal to yours. And there is not any good answer to it. The only good answer is government control. And that's why I feel that to some extent we have to put up with some of this. Now, what you're talking about, Sticks and Bones, for instance, I think it's shocking to have so many CBS stations not carry it. And there have been cases of NBC stations not carrying some NBC programs. But the only way CBS can be compelled to put that on would be to have the government compel it, and if the government was in that position of compelling these stations to run Sticks and Bones, it would also have been in the position of preventing any CBS station from carrying Sticks and Bones, which is probably not something the government would want on. So it may be the lack of government control permitted 3/4 of CBS viewers to see Sticks and Bones, and if we had had government controls, maybe nobody would have seen it at all. That's something worth thinking about also. I'd like to say also in this connection, and I'm not too happy with the answer I'm giving, because it does not guarantee you that you're going to get something that you ought to see in your community if the rest of the nation gets it. But newspapers do the same thing. There are occasional columns that a newspaper won't like. Maybe the newspaper says the column is irresponsible, but basically the columnist is saying something vigorously which the newspaper publisher doesn't like, and that edition of that column will be thrown out. And the particular columnist who ordinarily appears on Tuesday just won't show up on Tuesday. And there will be no apology. The columnist just won't be there. So far as you know, he's sick or on vacation. He'll be back in the paper on Thursday. So this kind of thing happens. And I don't think we ought to throw the First Amendment out to make sure that if any newspaper prints Joe Alsop, they all print him. But I think we ought to try to find out as much as we can what organs of information in a community, television stations, radio stations, newspapers, are censoring stuff out we want to see, and kick about it as best we can in whatever media we can use, picket, whatever. Yeah.
But do you have any suggestions on how we can bring competition back into the media so the competition will be the regulator?
Well, you have considerable competition, and it may be that you're not going to get extremes of editorial opinion, an extreme left-wing television station, an extreme right-wing television station. We don't have many extreme left or right-wing daily newspapers these days. These are mass media, and they're likely not to be situated out in terms of their editorial policies on any far fringe, not because the government is intimidating television that much, although it is to some extent, I think. I think television is blander than newspapers, and I think the difference chiefly is government interference with television. But the fact that they're mass media hold them in a little bit and keep them from going way out on one wing or another, and you're not likely to have underground newspaper-type journalism in mass media. Yeah. This gentleman feels we're in danger of being submerged in laws, that we're passing one law after another and we're going to drown in them and be all tied up in them in all various segments of society. And he thinks maybe what I'm suggesting might be useful in relation to what he was saying about laws. We could do without all these laws if we had a certain ethic, if people acted in a certain way, if we didn't need the compulsion of law. And maybe what I'm suggesting about broadcasting would work if the newsmen had the ethics to make it work, so that fairness came from them as a matter of professional ethics. I would hope it would work this way. I would not expect television news to be much different from newspaper news around the country. I would think there'd be some lousy television stations. There are now. There are some lousy newspapers. And I think we would continue in that direction. There would not be any great revolution if we got government out of broadcasting, but I think there would be one thing that would be obvious. For example, on Watergate, everybody has noticed, and it makes all of us in broadcasting, particularly in the networks, I think, a little uncomfortable that the major investigative journalism that has resulted in us knowing as much as we know about Watergate has come from the newspapers. Why didn't more of that come from the networks? There are various answers that can be given, and some of them provide some halfway decent defense for the networks. There are some special problems in doing investigative journalism as a network. But I think one of the major differences for the relative lack of courage, the newspapers are semi-courageous and television is just a little less. The newspapers ought to be more courageous, but we're not as courageous as they are. And I think one of the major differences is this intimidation by government, this feeling that we're going to get in trouble with government if we go in for investigative journalism and hard-hitting journalism. I think we would find some stations that were fair and generally the same ethics that we have now practiced in the newspaper profession, which is a pretty good level of ethics. It could be a lot better. It's better than it is in many countries, but I think you'd find broadcasting coming up at least to the level of the newspapers in doing investigative journalism, which would be helpful to all of us, and helping out the newspapers a little more than we have in such things as Watergate. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill Monroe. I told you he was more than just another pretty face, didn't I? I want to remind you, please, to keep in mind the remaining programs. Tomorrow night, Dick Richter of the ABC Evening News is going to tell us how a coast-to-coast network television newscast like that of Harry Reisner and Howard K. Smith is put together. Then on Thursday night, Jerome Barron on much of the other side of the coin than that which Bill took tonight. And then Friday night, the Doigs. We're glad you're coming. We hope you'll come again tomorrow night. Thank you very much.